November 28, 1944. At Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force in Versailles, France, a classified report marked urgent in red ink lay on General Dwight D. Eisenhower's desk. Ambassador Averil. Horriman had just returned from the Soviet Union after touring the battlefield with General Patton and had submitted detailed observations. One paragraph forced Eisenhower to read the same lines 3 times. During their return from the Saw River crossing, Patton had shown him a Sherman tank that destroyed 5 German Mar-5 Panthers in a single engagement. The American tank bore clear evidence of multiple direct hits from German guns, yet it remained operational. Patton credited its survival to field modifications using salvaged armor plate welded onto factory holes, and Harriman had observed similar changes on numerous Third Army tanks. If you are interested in the untold stories of World War II, where ordinary soldiers changed history through courage and innovation, consider subscribing because these men deserve remembrance. Eisenhower lifted his secure telephone and called Third Army headquarters in Nancy, France. When Patton answered, the Supreme Commander asked directly, "George, what exactly are you welding onto my tanks?" The answer revealed one of the war's most significant but forgotten tactical innovations. To understand why it mattered, we must go back 26 years to a dusty Maryland training field where 2 young officers argued beside a broken tank. At Campbell, Maryland, in January 1920, Captain Dwight Eisenhower watched a Renault tank belch black smoke and fell for the 3rd time that morning. Major George S. Patton kicked the tread with his boot and swore loudly. Both wore Tank Corps insignia and carried an impossible mission: train an army to fight with machines that barely functioned and develop tactics for weapons most senior officers considered experimental curiosities. Patton had recently returned from France, where he personally led American tanks into combat at St. Mihiel. A German machine gun bullet struck his thigh, and he lay in a shell hole for 3 hours bleeding while dictating his after-action report before evacuation. Now, in the uneasy peace of 1920, both men faced a different war, a bureaucratic conflict fought with memorandums and regulations. "The next war will be decided by tanks," Patton said, lighting a cigarette, independent armored formations striking deep into enemy territory. Eisenhower agreed, and together they wrote articles for the infantry journal describing mechanized warfare that sounded like science fiction: mass tank formations, deep penetration operations, speed over attrition. The chief of infantry summoned Eisenhower to Washington and in a meeting lasting only minutes warned him his ideas were dangerous and incompatible with established doctrine. If he published another article advocating independent tank operations, he would face court-martial. Eisenhower saluted, returned to Camp Me, and stopped publishing. Patton, shielded by family wealth and connections, transferred to the cavalry, carrying his theories into exile. They would not work together again for 23 years. Yet neither stopped thinking about tanks. By November 1944, that long wait had ended. At Third Army headquarters in Nancy, France, on November 27th, Ambassador Aval Harriman climbed into Patton's modified armored scout car, followed by British Lieutenant Colonel James Galt, Eisenhower's aide. Rain pounded the windshield as they headed toward the front lines. Eisenhower had personally asked Patton to show Harriman battlefield conditions, because Stalin questioned American combat effectiveness. Patton agreed, though he had his own purpose. They crossed captured German defenses, tank ditches, and anti-tank trenches, while rain turned fields into mud. They visited Major General John Wood's 4th Armored Division and toured maintenance areas where soldiers welded, hammered, and replaced tracks in the downpour, crossing the Saw River on a Bailey Bridge. They continued until Patton's radio operator intercepted a message about a Sherman returning from patrol with extraordinary news. Patton ordered his driver to locate the tank, which they found beside a ruined farmhouse surrounded by 5 destroyed German Panthers, their holes torn open and black scorch marks covering their turrets. The nearest wreck sat less than 50 yards away. Harriman stepped out and walked around the American Sherman. Welded to its front glacis plate were thick steel sections not issued from any American factory. The metal showed impact craters yet had held firm. A young lieutenant, the tank commander and sole survivor of his original crew, stood nearby. Asked where the armor came from, he explained it had been salvaged from a knocked-out Sherman 3 weeks earlier and welded onto their glacis by the maintenance section. Patton photographed the wrecked Panthers and explained that this soldier destroyed 2 at over 100 yards before charging 3 more at close range. Harriman examined a Panther penetrated through its side armor, its ammunition detonated and turret blown clear. The lieutenant described encountering 5 Panthers in column during thick morning fog, seizing Surprise, destroying the lead tank through the front slope, then disabling the second before it fired. The remaining 3 deployed and hammered them with 9 direct hits. The extra plate deflected 6 and stopped 3 that penetrated the original armor. Without it, they would have died. He ordered a charge, closing distance so their gun could pierce side armor. They lost their loader and radio operator, but the tank kept fighting. That evening, Harriman wrote that Stalin's criticism of American tanks might be technically correct, yet missed the essential point. The American soldier adapts, improvises, and overcomes technical limits through ingenuity. This, he believed, was America's greatest military advantage. He later showed Stalin photographs of the modified Sherman and destroyed Panthers. According to Patton's diary in the Library of Congress, Stalin praised Third Army's advance across France, though he never heard that much success came from violating regulations. On November 28th, Eisenhower called Patton and asked again what he was welding onto his tanks. Patton described salvaged armor plates added to glacis plates and turrets to improve survivability. Ordnance Command had ordered him to cease modifications, but he ignored the directive, prioritizing combat effectiveness over bureaucratic compliance. Instead of reprimanding him, Eisenhower asked about results. Tank losses had dropped, crew confidence improved, and kill ratios increased. Maintenance battalions stripped frontal armor from destroyed Shermans and even captured German tanks, testing plates before installation and inspecting welds. Mobility decreased slightly and fuel consumption rose, yet combat effectiveness improved dramatically. Eisenhower stood at his window watching headquarters function by regulation while soldiers welded armor in muddy fields and won battles. He decided not to order Patton to stop, but would not officially authorize the program either. It would not exist on paper. He requested documentation proving effectiveness and told Patton to gather photographs, specifications, procedures, and data within 2 weeks. Soon after, Eisenhower drafted a memo instructing Ordnance to expedite improved armor packages for M4 series tanks based on field reports of inadequate protection. He never mentioned Third Army's unauthorized work. Yet, weeks later, Ordnance quietly approved a field expedient armor program using similar techniques. By spring 1945, Patton ordered approximately 36 up-armored Shermans for each of his 3 armored divisions. The program spread unofficially as maintenance sergeants shared methods and commanders ignored regulations that endangered men. German forces never adopted comparable adaptations. Their superior tanks remained factory standard until war's end. Technically impressive, yet inflexible. The young lieutenant who destroyed 5 Panthers survived, returned to Michigan, married, raised children, and worked as a machinist for decades. His Distinguished Service Cross rested quietly in a drawer. Late in life, he showed a historian a photograph of the modified Sherman surrounded by destroyed Panthers and said, "The armor should not have been there, but it saved his life." That is the real story of wartime innovation. Unnamed sergeants welding steel in rain-soaked fields because survival demanded it. When Eisenhower made that call, he acknowledged a fundamental truth. Wars are won not by those with the best equipment on paper, but by those who adapt. The German Panther boasted thicker armor and a stronger gun. Yet paper specifications do not bleed or improvise. The war in Europe ended 6 months later. Patton's Third Army crossed the Rhine in March 1945 and drove deep into Germany while modified Shermans continued protecting crews. Patton died in an automobile accident in December 1945 and never saw peacetime doctrine incorporate lessons born in mud and defiance. Today, the United States military maintains rapid fielding initiatives and grants commanders authority to modify equipment to meet mission needs. Principles Patton and Eisenhower debated in 1920. Adaptability became a weapon system, and innovation a force multiplier. The Sherman commanded by that lieutenant now sits at the National Armor and Cavalry Museum at Fort Moore, Georgia. Visitors can see impact craters on welded plates and touch seams that held under fire, though many pass without noticing the significance. Those 3 inches of welded steel symbolize the moment American doctrine accepted what frontline soldiers always knew. When regulations conflict with survival, survival prevails. Eisenhower understood that sometimes the most important command decision is knowing when not to issue orders, when to trust men facing death over those in offices. The welded armor represents a philosophy defining American military power for decades, valuing innovation over compliance. It began with two young officers beside a broken tank in 1920 dreaming of an army that trusted its soldiers. And by 1944, that dream became reality because soldiers needed it and commanders believed in them. Remember their names and sacrifice. The most important innovations happen not in factories or design bureaus, but in maintenance tents and muddy battlefields. Innovation wins wars. Adaptability saves lives. Trust your soldiers. This narrative was researched with assistance from artificial intelligence, yet every historical fact, date, and quotation has been verified. Against primary sources, including Patton's diary at the Library of Congress, official United States Army records, and scholarly works by recognized military historians, reflecting careful human curation and responsibility.